Good evening, everyone. Sanbonani Khoyenant. Dumelang. My name is Vuya Ilengou, one of the directors at Dignity South Africa, and I have a privilege of hosting today's conversation. Some of my colleagues from Dignity South Africa are here, and one of them, Lee Maynard, as you can see her, who's our operations manager, will be monitoring the chat and your questions throughout the session. Please add your questions to the chat and we'll bring them into the discussion later in the session. Thank you for joining us today to what we hope will be a thoughtful and deeply human conversation about dementia and caregiving. Not from a clinical distance, but from a lived reality of families, the uncertainty, the love, the grief, and the emotions we often struggle to name. Dementia touches far more lives than we sometimes realize. For some of us, it may already be part of our daily life. For others, it may feel distant. Either way, tonight is for all of us. And just to clarify at the outset, this webinar is an educational conversation. It is not about Dignity South Africa or medically assisted dying. Tonight is about awareness. It's about understanding and supporting one another through a very difficult journey in life. This topic is also deeply personal for me. My grandfather had Alzheimer's disease, and as a teenager, I didn't understand what I was witnessing. Years later, after my mother qualified as a psychologist, she began teaching our family and the community about dementia through church talks and radio discussions. At the time, elderly women in Stroebel, Eastern Cape, where my parents come from, in separate incidents, were accused of witchcraft, and in some cases even killed after being found wandering and confused, disorientated, or away from their homes. Looking back, most of those behaviors may well have been linked to dementia, misunderstood in the absence of knowledge and awareness. I realized then that a lack of understanding doesn't just create fear. It can cost people's lives, matter, and why they remain so important. Because sadly, these misunderstandings are still happening even today. So settle in as we listen, learn, and reflect together. So let's begin. I am truly honored to be joined this evening by three extraordinary people who have each dedicated their lives in different ways to improve how we understand and respond to dementia. First, Professor Rayne Stroebel, who is a pioneering leader in aging and dementia care, with over 30 years' experience advancing the dignity, autonomy, and well-being of old people. Rayne holds a PhD in dementia studies and has worked across both scholarship and practice to reshape how society understands aging. He founded GERATEC in 1996, an organization that is now leading aged care provider in South Africa. He serves as a co-director of the International Longevity Center in South Africa, and also as a co-president of the International Longevity Center Global Alliance. Rayne, it's wonderful to have you here with us tonight.
Thank you, Vuya. Very honored to be here.
Next, we have Karen Borochowtiz, founder of Dementia South Africa, counselor, a leading advocate for people living with dementia. Her work is rooted in lived experience, having cared for her mother for 21 years through Alzheimer's disease, an experience that led her to build an organization that has supported countless families. Karen, we're grateful that you're here with us today.
Thanks so much for the invitation.
And then finally, Reverend Mogomotsi Diutlwileng, a respected minister of the Methodist Church of Southern Africa, author, retreat facilitator, organizational strategist, and a life coach. He brings insight into the emotional, spiritual, and community dimension of caregiving. drawing on his personal experience of caring for his mother with dementia. Through faith and lived experience, he offers perspective on how communities can walk alongside families with compassion and grace. Mfundisi, your presence tonight is truly appreciated.
Ngiyabonga. Thank you very much, and greetings to all.
Thank you, all three of you, for being here and for the work you've each done in this space. Many people only truly understand dementia when it enters their lives. And I'd like to invite each one of you, my panelists, to take us back to the moment when dementia stopped being an abstract concept for you and it became something personal. Rayne, let's begin with you. What was that moment like for you?
Mhm. For me, it was a moment before dementia was even a reality in terms of terminology or diagnosis, with my grandfather, who lived just across the road from us. And he was becoming more and more, which in those days my grandmother described as kens, meaning in Afrikaans, derivative Afrikaans word, becoming more and more like a child. And for us, there was no diagnosis. It was simply a phase of aging at that point. And it took me many, many, many years to really understand the huge impact that this had on my life and on the life of everyone around us, my family. But to tell you the honest truth, to this day, as much as I have read and seen and studied, still understand very little of this place that people go to. And hoping that one day there will be a true and deep understanding, as opposed to an intellectual or medical definition of this incredibly complex way of being in the world.
Mm. Thank you for sharing, Rayne. Karen, how did that moment unfold for you?
Well, I think much, as Rayne speaks about the place that it is, it's for me that uncertainty. I shared a bedroom with my late grandmother. I was always around older people. My mother did a lot of work, in some of the old age homes. So I was exposed to older people getting older around me quite often and a lot. But it kind of was for me, well, this is how old people are. So when it came to my mother's diagnosis, it was almost, this can't be happening. This isn't really how it is, because aren't all old people, and my mother was only 62, aren't all old people forgetful, anxious, repeating themselves, etc.? So that's really where it was for me. But it's that really challenging place, that scary place, that for me is where it really is, where the heart of dementia is.
Both you and Rayne have mentioned that unknown place that people go to, and you've also mentioned how scared you were. And that must have been so confusing for you. And we'll unpack all of these things as we go along. But I just need to know from Mfundisi, how did the shift happen for you?
Well, initially I thought it was at the point when I started nursing my mother. But actually, after our conversation last week, I went deep into my memory and I realized that actually my paternal grandmother showed signs that now, as I reflect, I know that it was dementia, but we did not have a name at that point because I was a toddler. I was a toddler, early 80s, when she began to show signs of confusion, remembering the past, talking about people in the past, and just taking off and wandering.
Mm.
And then in later in life, then I had to nurse my own mother. And in the case of my mother, actually the whole thing was triggered by the death of my father, her husband, who was murdered. And she carried that with her. And then there were other deaths that came after that. But all of that then coincided with old age. So you had grief, loneliness, kissing with old age, and the brain just deteriorated very quickly. And it was a very confusing thing because, my mother was a very strong human being, very feisty, a disciplinarian, and then it all went down very quickly. Traumatic, shocking, confusing. And that was only then I learned that there is even a medical term for what she was going through.
Yeah.
So it found us unprepared. And we just had to roll with the punches, not even knowing what we were doing.
Such a deep emotional impact, Mfundis. And all three of you have mentioned such poignant moments in your lives of how dementia just came into your lives and became the reality. So thank you, all of you, for grounding the conversation in lived experiences. Already, we can hear that dementia is never just a diagnosis. It is a human experience that reshapes relationships and identity. Let's now build a shared understanding of what dementia actually is, and perhaps just as importantly, what it is not. So, Rayne, please help us frame that discussion and briefly explain what dementia is, the different types of dementia, and how it differs from what we might expect from normal aging.
I'm going to sidestep your question because it is such a multi-layered and multifaceted. As I say, I call it a way of being in the world. And if we want to simplify it by, the different types and the different stages, we already lose 99% of, understanding. As Karen said, and Mogotsi also pointed out, we don't know. We talk about atrophy, we talk about neurocognitive impairment, we talk about different places in the brain that are affected. For a very long time, I've been saying that dementia is a disease of the brain and not of the soul. And yet, the more I learn and the more I meet people along this path, I also see that, and we know this from studies, that there are people who show all the so-called signs of dementia, and yet on autopsy they find that there is no impairment in terms of physiological impairment in the brain. So we cannot pin this down to one thing. We know that there are more than 100 types of dementia, depending on which part of the brain is being affected. So I always avoid a simple explanation because it is an incredibly complex condition, an incredibly complex manifestation of something that the more we learn, the more we realize how little we know. I also maintain that if you have met one person living with neurocognitive impairment, you have met one person living with neurocognitive impairment. Every individual comes to this stage in life, some earlier, some later, but everyone comes to this stage in life with a personality type, with a cultural background, with a you know, educational background, with a different language, a different understanding, a different family dynamics. So I really want to avoid us to try and simplify it into, this type has these symptoms. In fact, the whole question about behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia, BPSD, has been debunked over and over again. We find that many of the what we call symptoms that are attributed to the condition are often normal human reactions. That, we talk about things like wandering.
Yeah.
People walk for a reason. They don't wander because they have dementia.
Okay.
People get aggressive for a reason. They
Mm-hmm.
don't get aggressive because they have dementia. I always say when I drive from Hout Bay, where I live, to Somerset West on the N2, if anyone should record me inside my car, I will be locked up for a very long time. I don't have dementia.
In
Yeah,
trouble.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's not because I have dementia. It is because I get so angry. I get so upset about the way people drive that I show behavior that would easily be labeled as a BPSD. So I think we have to, as Alan Power, one of my mentors, say, we have to change our minds about people whose minds have changed.
Okay, I like that. So my question was not really to simplify it. My question was so that other people who don't know this disease can at least understand. For instance, before I actually researched this, I thought that Alzheimer's was just dementia. I thought it was the same thing as dementia. I didn't understand that there were different types of dementia. So that's why I wanted people to actually understand, because I think people walk around and saying, oh, someone has dementia. Sorry, someone has
And not
Alzheimer's.
Alzheimer's. Yeah.
And no,
So I hear
exactly,
that
not
all the
dementia.
time.
Yes.
I
That's why
hear
I
that
was
all the
asking
time.
that, just so that people understand that the different kinds, dementia is the umbrella, and then under that there are different types of dementias that people can have, and not all of them will be the same.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
different types of dementia will also be different for different individuals. But I always use the term, it's similar to the analogy of cancer. It's an umbrella term. Cancer is an umbrella term. You get brain cancer, lung cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer. The same goes for dementia. Dementia is an umbrella term. And under that term, we have many different types of dementia, of which Alzheimer's seems to be the most common one. But again, the more we learn, the more we find different types of dementia. What is the difference between dementia and normal aging, you also ask? I always say, we all walk into the kitchen. I do it all the time, and think, why did I come into the kitchen? And you have to retrace your steps. Okay, that's normal. We all forget names. We all forget where we put our keys. We all forget PIN numbers. We all forget passwords. We forget names of people all the time because I think we have such an incredible sensory overload. I always say when you walk into the kitchen to make a cup of tea, knowing that you've come to make a cup of tea, and suddenly you don't know how to make the cup of tea, or you get into your car, you might not you might have forgotten where you wanted to go, but if you forget how to put the key in the ignition and start the car, then you should be worried. However, now that we're there, maybe I'm jumping the gun a bit. Dementia is a diagnosis by exclusion. So I think we are living in such fear of dementia that a lot of people start with that. It must be dementia. We see a phenomenon called subjective cognitive impairment, which means that, I convince myself that I am living with dementia. That is incredibly dangerous. So I always say to people, go back, go back, go back. Don't start with this, creating this monster in your own mind. Start by eliminating things that could present with a form of cognitive impairment. And there are many of those that we can explore that we should exclude before we start thinking of dementia. And with older people especially, something like urinary tract infection presents exactly like dementia. You, as even a normal GP would find it difficult, unless they do lots more tests to find out what is the cause of this confusion. So hence my saying, we could spend 3 days talking about the different types and where does it happen in the brain and what are the effects. It is incredibly complex. And let's just start by saying that dementia is a diagnosis by exclusion.
Okay. And I mean, that gives us an understanding. It's not a whole lot of understanding, but a bit of understanding. Because I think most of us always think that we are getting dementia, because I sometimes think I am, because I'm becoming very forgetful these days. But as you said, it does not really, for most families, the journey doesn't begin with a diagnosis. It begins with something small. It begins with little, those something that are just there, that are subtle. And Karen, what are some of the early signs that families tend to overlook or misunderstand? And when should those subtle changes become a reason we seek help? Just to go back to what Rayne was saying, when do we go back to the doctor to exclude or to be diagnosed that now we do have dementia?
Well, I'll speak that on my lived experience, as well as what we see from a number of people that have come to DementiaSA over the years, and that we see in our support groups, etc. And the very early signs are usually those that are missed. And if a spouse, they still live together, a spouse always tries to cover it up and deny that anything is happening, particularly if you say, gosh, your mom is really forgetful these days. Are you noticing anything that's different about mom? And, my father always used to say, hey, she's fine. She's, and he kept protecting her with a lot of the excuses of she's finding the housework very, quite onerous. The cleaning and the cooking, it's all very demanding for her. And, she really needs a break. And, please don't bring up the fact that you're noticing that, her memory, or she's forgetting things, or she's repeating herself, or whatever. And many times, in fact, the person with dementia, or the person living with dementia, is sometimes that person that also doesn't want to admit. Now, we're talking about somebody now who has been diagnosed, as in the case of my mom, where she would make light of the fact that she's forgetting these things. And, what do you expect at my age? Well, what do you expect at my age? You know, she was 62. So what is it actually when it starts to attach itself, where you can actually see somebody present with huge difficulty and become have these challenges with things that they usually were very, very au fait with and very confident in doing. But we do know that there's huge stigma that's attached to any kind of memory problem, cognitive decline, or any of those kinds of challenges, even those with brain injuries. You know, there certainly is a huge stigma attached, because essentially it's something whereby that people can't see. It's not a physical thing. It's not like breaking your arm or a knee replacement or walking with a stick or whatever. This is something invisible. And that's why the disease later on, as people present it in family groups or in sibling groups, it's almost that the person then does become invisible. Because, you know, it's that that challenge with how do I deal with them now? But I think we're going to touch on that a little bit later.
We'll touch on
So
the stigma.
I think what we do need to be concerned about is that when it starts interfering with daily life. Rayne gave us some examples of that, repeating themselves over and over, short-term memory loss, which wasn't necessarily there before, heightened confusion and heightened anxiety, huge, particularly in people that are going through the early stages. In my mother particularly, she was a cake decorator and she loved her garden. And all of a sudden, she really wasn't interested in any of that anymore. Her loss of initiative in things that she usually loved, you know, was profound. She also became very unsure of herself, would always sort of self-doubt, and also became very suspicious. You know, like if my father and I were chatting just about general things, you know, you're talking about me. You know, that kind of suspicion, which was really debilitating for her.
I think that gives us an indication and some ideas of what to look out for. I mean, for me, that what stand out is exactly what you were saying. When you start losing interest in what you used to love. And what Rayne said is not forgetting things, is forgetting how to. If you go to the kitchen to make tea, if you forget that I went to the kitchen to look for my keys or to make tea, that's a different thing. But if you start making tea and then you don't know the difference between the milk and the sugar, then those are the signs that maybe we then need to look out for.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But recognition, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. I mean, our beliefs and cultural context, they shape how we interpret things. And sometimes that can lead to harm for a person living with dementia. Mfundisi, let me bring you in here. How do cultural and spiritual beliefs shape how dementia is recognized? Especially when behaviors like hallucination, disorientation are seen as something else and may lead to misunderstanding or harm.
Generally, as people, anything that we do not understand, we are scared of it, whether we have dementia or not. Once we don't understand something, we are scared of it. We want to pull away from it. We don't want it. And the issue about dementia is that, as you expressed earlier on in your introduction, in rural places where people are not really educated and informed about a disease like this, all that they see is a behavior that is perceived or categorized as abnormal. And therefore, because they do not have the medical or science lenses or framework to scan and diagnose this through. They would then use what they have access to. And what they have access to is their culture, is their belief system, and then add on to that their fear. And so they look at a particular behavior that looks strange through the lenses of a culture that has got no idea of this particular disease. They look at it from the perspective of their traditions, and they have got no explanation for this. And then they go to the third level, which is their fear. And their fear within the framework of the fearful state, then the suspicion becomes this must be something demonic. It must be something of a witchcraft. It must be, because if we can explain it, then we find a label for it. And therefore, if it's not good, then it's bad. And therefore, it must fall within the realm of witchcraft and all that. And then because we are scared, then now when you are scared, you can either fight or freeze or run away. And therefore, they decide to fight. They lash out. People get harmed. People are treated with suspicion. People are dehumanized and dejected out of society. Yeah. So the problem that we are dealing with here is that culture, tradition, and our social orientation for a very long time, particularly as Black, rural, and poor communities, did not have the language for this. And therefore, people acted out of their fear and the framework of their culture.
I mean, like what happened this past Sunday? That lady in Eastern Cape in Mabo who was murdered because people said that she was a witch. And I suspect that some of her symptoms, I mean, when you listen to some of the stuff that they're talking about, she probably had, even though maybe it was not diagnosed, but it sounds like there were some symptoms of dementia. But because there is no language, there's no understanding, and the fear comes in, then it becomes something quite dangerous. And what you...
Sorry.
Yes, sure, jump in, Rayne.
No. I so deeply understand what the Reverend says. And I want to bring that whole dilemma that you just described within, African traditions or within rural parts of this country. I want to bring that dilemma as is into the medical fraternity as well, with huge respect for the work that is being done. But it is still a mystery. People people make it sound as if the medical fraternity has figured this out. We haven't. And I think what we figured out is how to chemically manage certain behaviors related to the distress of people living with dementia or the distress of people who have to care for them. But the huge uncertainty, and for me to a large extent, and I want to call it the mystical side of dementia, is so not recognized and is so not addressed. We want to look for that silver bullet to cure. And what Karen describes beautifully, that beginning stages where we think and feel that we are losing the person, where people walk with the knowing that they have dementia for up to 5 years before they actually acknowledge, accept. I mean, the majority of people in this country, 99% of the people in this country will not ever find a real diagnosis. Thanks to the dynamics of our situation. But something that escapes, and that is in the World Health Organization, excuse me, in the World Health Organization's definition of dementia, which is a very elaborate and scary definition, there is one sentence that gets almost no attention. And that sentence says, consciousness is not affected.
Okay. So even though they might be losing themselves, consciousness is still there.
Consciousness is always there. And that, Mogomotsi, is where I think, we should dare to go. That identity is eroded by society, not necessarily by the condition. And what is consciousness? That is the deep knowing of I, the deep knowing of I am. People often say to me, we don't go and visit her because she's no longer our mother, which is one of the most horrific things that I hear it all the time, that you could think about this person. She is always your mother. And she knows that she is your mother. She might not make the dots to bring the name to the person that walked in the room, but she knows. And that is where the mystical element of this condition needs to be explored more and more, and where we can go back to African cultures and African traditions, because it is not all bad. It is not all, made out to be witchcraft. And I think we in the Western world have got so much to learn from this deeply spiritual connectedness, which brings me to thinking more and more that dementia is a disease of disconnect. And the more I work with it, the more I see how people are affected in older age by unresolved trauma.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And let's just for a second look at the cohort in this room today of people who have lived through apartheid, people who have lived through parents, grandparents in the Holocaust, people who have lived, myself included, through national service, people who had served on the border, the number of women who had miscarriages, which up until very recently was considered to be, that child was considered to be medical waste. People who had backstreet abortions, and we sit with a generation that has multiple layers of trauma that they never had the privilege of addressing or resolving. And that trauma causes a disconnect. It's like if the plugs in the dining room keep on tripping, you're going to switch off that little, not the main switch, Okay, but you switch off that thing that says plugs in the dining room because you can't deal with it.
Can't deal with it. Yes. You know,
And this is where we need to think of the spiritual side of dementia, because dementia does not attack consciousness. It doesn't attack God mind or I am or whatever you want to call it.
Rayne,
But I
that's
think
such a
most
powerful
people are too
thing.
scared to go there.
Yeah, I mean, you've just basically said that dementia, if I can just phrase it, and hopefully I'm going to do it, I'm going to give it the dignity that you did, is that it's the disease of the disconnected soul. So the soul gets disconnected. And what you then talking about is what Mfundisi started with when he mentioned that his mom had so much grief. There was so much that was happening that his soul, if we want to take what you're telling us, then probably disconnected, which is where then the dementia came from. So I'm just connecting now the dots. And all of this is highlighting how powerful all of these things come together and the meaning that we attach to what people experience. And before you started, I was going to ask you to actually tell us more about the dignity and the identity and the autonomy of the person living with dementia. And I think you've just started touching on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are, and I see someone commented on people outside of communities, Mogomotsi, also they do exactly the same. You know, if we look at I want to call it torture that older persons living with dementia within the Western structure, some of them are put through in terms of the medication, the antipsychotics, benzodiazepines, and it's a poisoning. It's a poisoning of a person's body in order to control behavior, because there is no good outcome in terms of increased awareness, increased cognition, increased independence in activities or daily living. So yeah, I think our fear of looking at the sacredness of the human spirit of the person living with neurocognitive impairment has led us down a very, very, very slippery slope. And that as a community of thinkers, we need to seriously reconsider the way that we treat people living with this condition.
But the fear of the
Because
unknown, as Mfundisi was sorry to cut you, that fear of the unknown is the reality of most families live with, because when your loved one starts doing stuff that you don't understand, like for instance with my grandfather, some of the stuff, some of his behavior for me was downright scary, because now it's your loved one and they're completely different from the person that you know them to, know them to be. So that fear is a reality for most families, because as much as we can say that we need to look at the soul, we need to look at what is going on within the I am. If my mother is changing in front of me, it's difficult for me to accept that, because I want my mother back. I want the person that I love to be back. So the spiritual side of it becomes then quite difficult to bring back to the person that you love, which is why we then find that in rural areas, people will then say that there's something wrong with you, there's witchcraft that's going on, or you are being punished for something that you did in your past. So all of the sins that you did are now coming back to haunt you, which is why people, when they start talking and they hallucinate, people who don't understand those things will start saying, oh yeah, it's the person that they killed, or the sin that they committed. So as much as I understand what you're saying, that there is so much that the medical fraternity doesn't understand about this disease that still needs to be studied. But the reality of the situation for most of the people that are here is that their loved ones are no longer who they are. And they need to understand how to deal with those things.
I don't want us for one second to romanticize, because the reality can be incredibly harsh. But again, I think if we can maybe reframe what we consider to be normal and rather go there. I would say we want to bring the person back. We want to keep them, functioning the way we want them to function, and what is normal and what is good behavior and what is acceptable, blah, 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 blah. And working and living with someone with cognitive impairment means I have to go there, as uncomfortable as it is, as sometimes embarrassing as it could be. But the conflict starts when we want them to be normal and them to be rational and them to not, show behavior that might embarrass us or that we don't understand. And it's a massive, massive, massive challenge. But if we can see the person behind the diagnosis, if you can keep on reminding yourself, in spite of that behavior, this is my father. I don't understand it. I cannot comprehend what's going on here. However, it is my father.
And they're still part of our family. And that's exactly where I want to bring Karen into this. Because all of these things I experienced, I mean, the fear and the shame sometimes is how families respond to what is happening, because we want our person to become normal. We want the mother to be the mother that used to be. So from your experience, Karen, how do the stigma and the shame that often comes with it, both for the individual and the families, lead to the isolation of the person living with dementia?
So I think Vuya, is the greatest challenge is what we've been discussing now about the stigma, that people don't want to admit that they are having challenges with short-term memory or with repeating themselves. They know maybe secretly that they are concerned about that, but they don't want to have themselves assessed. And that's one of the greatest problems, because as Rayne alluded earlier on, there are a number of medical conditions that can cause symptoms that mimic dementia. So depression, thyroid problems, hormonal imbalances, UTIs, liver and heart problems, vitamin deficiency. The list can go on and on and on and on. And as Rayne mentioned, it is a condition of exclusion. So many things are excluded before we make a final, let's look at this and let's try and see if, this experience and all the trauma and undealt with, emotional stuff, is it as a result of all of that? So assessment is absolutely essential. So if we look in rural areas and in many of the other peri-urban areas, we don't unfortunately have sufficient memory clinics where people are actually looking out for memory challenges, the stigma that's attached to it within these communities. So that's really, if it does, if it is that it is a dementia, diagnosed as a dementia, I can tell you unequivocally that if somebody and a family is educated, a family is made aware of, one person can live positively with dementia. And that's that's the most important thing. If you change the mindset of a community, of a family, you create awareness, you educate, the lived experience of that person and that family can be positive. I have proven that with my late mom. But fear is one of the greatest aspects, both from the person with the cognitive challenges and from community. People know how to accept the person or how to include them. But then, because this is something that is based in fear, and dementia is the third most feared disease in the world. So it really is something. That's why I'd rather not have myself assessed. I'd rather not know what it is. So rather than just, finding out and accepting and everybody getting together, this is a disease not of one person. This is a disease of a family and of a community.
Yes. And how do we then, in practical terms, help that person now who's been diagnosed? We're no longer doubting that they have dementia. They've now been diagnosed that they have it. How can we as families help that person living with dementia connect and not be excluded within the family? Because sometimes I find that if an uncle or a grandfather has been diagnosed or your mother has been diagnosed, they start not being invited to family birthdays because people are embarrassed that my mom is going to start saying inappropriate things. So those people get left behind. So in practical terms, how do we then make sure that the person who has been diagnosed with dementia remains connected and they become part of the family?
So that is very much based in the education and the awareness, is bringing it up to the attention of family. My mother was one of 11 children. And we often used to say, Mom has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. So when you see Joyce, you may see aspects of her that you recall and you remember. And maybe speak about the ice creams that you used to buy near the beach in East London and take a walk, and on Sundays do certain things that to include her still and to take her to a place where she believes that she still is valued and she still does have purpose. And I think that's one of the real challenges that we find is that because people don't create some kind of awareness or don't read up about what the disease is all about. The challenges are that they stay in the dark, and it means that the person with dementia is also in the dark because they can't find ways in which they can make it positive to live with the dementia. My children were very, very young when my mother was diagnosed, and when she used to interact and engage with my children, it was the most special thing because she knew exactly. She played out some of the things that were part of her childhood within the context of with them. So, Play-Doh and rolling it out, being a cake decorator and a baker, rolling out fondant and marzipan and things like that really brought enormous pleasure to her. So it's to try and find the important things of living positively, bringing and highlighting the positive rather than saying, well, we can't have these do's, or we can't do this, or we can't do that. Know that they can possibly only be there for a short while before they become more anxious, or have them seated in a quieter area, but people coming in, talking to them, and how are you today, Granny? Or, whatever it is, it's important to also still create, to break down that barrier of fear and of huge stigma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Karen, those are practicals way, then I guess we can keep them still connected and part of the family. Mfundisi, how can communities like churches and other social spaces create environments where people can be included instead of being isolated? You know, sometimes you go to church and there's someone who prays and prays, an older person who just keeps on praying, and they'll pray and they'll pray and they'll start crying and they'll start naming things that you don't understand, and they'll stand up and they'll want to sing even though everyone is quiet. And you can see how uncomfortable everyone gets. How do we deal with those situations? How do we allow people to feel that they're still part of the community?
I think awareness, as Karen mentioned, awareness. Just teaching communities like faith communities, and it is important that faith communities are taught, and such webinars, for instance, are shared with churches so that we begin to find creative ways of integrating people that are suffering from this disease in a community. Remember, amongst the people that are coming to a church, if you are a Christian or any faith community, some of them, the faith community is a crucial and actually the fundamental structure that forms a family. Some people find solace in church, and therefore it is important that that place where people find solace is informed about a disease like this and integrated. Let me share from a personal experience. As you all know here, that I am a minister. So when Mama was sick with this, I was serving out in a church community in Edenvale. And I made the staff in the office aware. I had about 5 staff members in the office. They were aware of what I'm dealing with back at home. The leaders were aware about what I'm dealing with. And as part of I'm talking here on my point is integration here, and how that staff was able to chip in when my wife or myself are not available. Sometimes I would be visiting a sick person out in hospital or at home to go give them Holy Communion. And by the way, it was one of the most difficult pastoral work that I had to do around that time, because you can then imagine you have got your mother who is sick at home and needing somebody to care for them. And then you've got to leave them and go care for somebody else's mother and give them Holy Communion and be there for them and be patient with them. Very difficult. And I think as a minister, I fall in a very unique category that I am in the caring profession. And part of the challenge I had then was that. But then what was nice, coming back to the point, was that when I used to do that, going out to look, to care for others, the staff would help, would volunteer, take turns. I will go and stay with Mama. We had a lay pastor who would then take a car, goes be with Mama for that hour or 2 hours. I will be doing other things out there. One way of integrating these people into a community called the church. And furthermore, I would go with Mama to church, sometimes, especially at the beginning stages of the thing, because sometimes she was on and then sometimes she was off. I remember one particular instance where I was in the middle of the sermon, and she stood up and came to me and began to talk and all that. And gracefully, one of the mothers stood up, took her gently, and said with her, and when she really became unsettled and uncomfortable, took her to a side room where there were soft chairs where they could sit there, and and that for me was soothing, was pastoral, and very caring. And it is those simple ways. In other church communities, for instance, we've got what we call fellowship groups or classes or small groups or cell groups or whatever you want to call them. And you've got cell group leaders, you've got class members who, where if you know that within this class we have this person, it is part of the Christian caring character to just, for instance, know that, okay, Vuya's mother, or Vuya is taking care of the mother, but Vuya has got a, say, graduation, right, that Vuya needs to go to. A class member or class people could go to Vuya's mother for that 2 hours, 3 hours. They stay there, they help, they cook, whatever, just for Vuya to go. Because then, as a person that is caring for the patient, you can't stop living. I couldn't stop ministering. I couldn't stop doing the pastoral work simply because my mother was sick. And I want to move a little bit, go back a little bit to the point that Professor Stroebel mentioned earlier on about how we need to understand the patient. But there is something here that I want to raise from the point of somebody, from the carer's perspective. When this whole thing started with Mama, it was very confusing. And what is confusing more with this disease is that if somebody has got a chest pain, they will say, hey, I don't feel well. I've got a pain right here. They can express it. They can say it. Or I've got a headache. You can tell other people. With dementia, you just see a person acting out. I mean, with my mother, after the accident of my sister, the brutal murder of my father, and then the brutal murder of her nephew. During that week where we were preparing for the funeral of my nephew, she simply lost it completely. Completely. No warning, no explanation. She just started being confused, started laughing a lot and all that. And we all thought, okay, it's shock, it's grief. Little did we know that it was going to be downhill from that point on. So the point is, as Mama was acting out like that, we were all confused. We were all shocked. It is so there is a level, Prof, that as carers we need to be taught as well how to respond.
We will get that. Yes, we'll get that to that, Mfundisi, because it is a very important thing that we need to touch on, because caregiving is often an act of love and just an emotional marathon, as you're saying. But I just want to go back to, or stress what you've just said and summarize it, that what you and Karen were saying, that it's important to be open to the family and to the community that your loved one is no longer the person that they know. Because the thing that causes the stigma and the shame and the isolation is the fact that we're hiding the diagnosis. People want to continue living as they are. Whereas if you start telling people that, listen, this is what's happening, when someone then acts up, it doesn't become a shameful thing. They understand that so-and-so is acting up because this is what they're going through. But back to the point that Mfundisi raised, let's talk about the caregivers now. Current caregiving is often spoken about with admiration, but that's not always honesty, right? It's not always all rose gardens. It's hard. And from your experience, what are the emotional realities caregivers face that people don't always see?
Wow, that's a really, really, really loaded question. And, you know, I must say that over the years that my mother had Alzheimer's for 21 years, I was also raising my family, 2 young children. I was also holding my father and trying to be his support. So those emotions are very deep sadness, huge frustration, but the most overwhelming in the beginning stages was my anger. How was this possible that my mother, at the age of 62, is diagnosed with this? I mean, haven't I got enough? I've got young children. It was devastating, more devastating than anything that I've ever experienced again. But what I've encountered and what I've experienced, that over the years working with families, is to have open and frank discussions. If it is that, say for instance, it's a larger family or there's 5 siblings or whatever, and things are not so great between 2 of them, have a mediator that can get everybody together so that the discussion is open and everybody has a chance to firstly speak and be heard, be held, and be acknowledged. And then also to accept that each and every person within the family has had a different relationship with the person with dementia. Whether it is their experience is different. It's important to understand that we have to know that mom will need care. Mom will need to be looked after at some point, and that there's some kind of responsibility that everybody has to take on. Whether it is that I need to assist my sister who's looking after mom, or dad, give him a bit of respite or whatever. There is a responsibility. And as I said before, this is not just a disease or a condition that affects one person. This is a disease that affects a family and affects a community. And that's always the precursor to understanding what is my responsibility. My responsibility is to educate, to create an awareness, and to still have people treat mom with dignity and not phone my father and tell him that, did he hear or has he read about coconut water or some other really strange internet sensation, but that this is something really that is not just about the superficial, but that there is something here that we need to have an open discussion about, and also learn how we can make this an experience for each one in the family that is part of their relationship with that they had with their loved one. So, you know, that deep sadness, that frustration and that anger, I would definitely say are definitely part of the landscape that I experienced right in the beginning.
Yeah. And Mfundisi, you were talking about how you navigated caregiving within your family. Could you share some of the emotions that you went through as you cared for your mother?
The first emotion is that of confusion. As a lay person, we don't know what is going on. We see the action, so you get confused. And what is actually even difficult at the beginning stages is that sometimes she's present, she's aware, and then it goes off. So you get a sense that, oh, okay, she's okay, she responds, she's, and then suddenly it goes off again, and that brings emotional swing right there. You move from accepting that she is not there, and then you move to, she's here now. And then the cultural things then again come in. In my situation, and there was an instance where it was just me and mom in the house, and she was in the bathroom, and I heard such funny sounds and discovered that actually, instead of washing the face in the bath, she was actually washing it in the toilet tub and all that. And one of the things that is very embarrassing as a male Black person is then to move into a room when your mother is naked. But then what do you do when you're in my situation? You've got to just break all the rules that you were brought up with, or your beliefs, and get in there and help your mother and make sure that she's decent and all that. Very, very embarrassing, because you feel like you're taking away her dignity. It is uncomfortable. So you deal with confusion, you deal with the discomfort, you deal with exhaustion, and then you then have got to deal with religious issues, faith questions, God, why this? Why me? And why is this happening to my mother? And you've got all those questions then. So you've got an emotional turmoil, a spiritual turmoil, you've got the confusion, you've got cultural barriers, and then you've got physical exhaustion, where you are simply tired because you're always on guard. You know, 1 minute she's here, and then the next minute, Mama, where are you? And you looking around, embarrassing situations like when a person wets the floor, and this is your parent, this is your family member. It's very difficult. Actually, maybe let me stop there.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that caregiving is an act of love and resilience, but also of real exhaustion. I mean, personally, I remember how exhausted my grandmother was by the time my grandfather passed away. And as much as she was grieving her husband, there was a sense of relief and the guilt that came with that relief. And I think it's important that we acknowledge these feelings tonight, the feelings of anger, the feelings of frustration, the feelings of hopelessness, and feelings of just being exhausted and feeling guilty that you're feeling those feelings towards your loved one. because this also then brings to mind the fact that the caregivers themselves are human beings and they need the support. So, Rayne, at what point, if I can bring you in here, do caregivers themselves need care? And how do we recognize that moment? How do they need to be able to recognize that they need help?
One of the first things that I always say to family caregivers, especially spouses, is the fact that your spouse got a diagnosis does not make you Superman or Superwoman. And I think right from the beginning, as Karen said, and to acknowledge the fact that this is no one signed up for this, as spouses, as children, um, no one signed up for this, and that it is an incredibly complex emotional journey that you're going to go through. And if you don't look after yourself or find ways to look after yourself or get people to look after you or whatever, you are not going to make it. You are not going to be able to hold the space for this person. And therein comes then a lot of animosity and anger that exacerbates the already precarious emotional relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So the caregiver needs to be aware of the challenges. And, this thing of validation to me is incredibly important. As Karen said, to acknowledge to yourself, as hard as it is, that I am angry.
Mm.
Or I don't know what to do. To be brutally honest and say, I'm going for a walk in the garden because I really don't know how to deal with this situation now. Or I feel inadequate right now. Or I have no idea what to do now. Or you know what, I'm just going to sit in the corner and cry for a little while, and then we can try again. Because as again, Al Power says, people living with dementia are really our true teachers. They teach us about geduld, about incredible patience, inhumane patience, unbelievable patience. And sometimes we run out of patience. And then it's okay to say, I've now run out of patience. I'm going to have a whatever. A cigarette, a drink, I'm going to pray, I'm going to do whatever, but I don't know how to deal with this. And just another thing on the caregiving relationship, something that has made an incredible impact on me is, I put it in the chat box as well, the theory of presence, of sometimes we don't know what to do. We have no idea what to do. We have no answer. We have no solution. But the biggest gift that any one human being can give another is their presence. And that you can simply say, Mom, I have no idea what we're going to do now, but I am here with you and I am here for you.
That's beautiful.
And be that. Center yourself. Stand on both feet and say, I am here now for you and with you. I have no idea how we're going to clear up this mess, but I am here. I am here. That's all. That is incredibly powerful.
Yeah. And I think for me, also what's important is that if, for instance, one sibling is taking care of, for instance, the mom or the dad, or even if the husband is taking care of the wife and their kids, those people need a break. They also need time to be given, they need to be given time to just go, even if you just say to them, go and do your hair. go meet your friends in the
Yeah,
pub and drink. Because
absolutely.
what I find is that there's always that one sibling that ends up being the caregiver, and everyone continues with their lives because they're like, oh, Vuya's got this, so we can live our lives peacefully, she's fine. And then what happens is that they throw in the money. So as long as they give you the money, they think that emotionally you'll also be okay. And that is, for me, not fair, because
No.
you can't, no one chooses this. So it cannot be that there's only one person then who this lands up on. And it's just something that maybe we just need to touch on so that people understand. Where we're gonna go now to the questions, because I mean this has been such an honest, emotional, and thought-provoking conversation. We've explored the lived experiences. We've explored the shame. We've explored the fact that this is a disease of disconnected soul, and that people go to that unknown place, that medicine still doesn't know what this is all about. And Rayne, when you started saying that when autopsies are performed, it still sometimes doesn't show that this person had dementia. And that just shows maybe it is a spiritual thing. But we're not going to sit here and try and romanticize it, because people are living traumatic lives because of dementia. So I want to open it up.
Questions.
Yes, I want to open
Just
it up
looking
to the
at time
questions now.
too, I've noted
Yeah.
the questions and some of them have been answered. Thank you, Rayne and Karen. You were answering in the chats. There were only 3, and I have people's email addresses. I think I'm rather going to work with the panel and get good, rather email the individuals really solid questions. However, it also strikes me just listening to all of you that this is such a broad, rich topic. And we may well have a follow-up session. So if people want to put other questions in the chat, they're welcome to. But I also want to be mindful of people's time and maybe move to wrap up now.
Yeah.
And I will then see the questions are answered individually. So please feel free to give questions and I'll send you emails with the answers as far as possible. And then we'll also look at what those questions are and maybe formulate a second session.
Oh, my apologies. Sorry. I thought we were going until 8. Apologies, guys. Sorry. Maybe we'll, so let's be mindful of the time. Karen, sorry, Lee, do we have any hands up?
I see questions coming through, but I'll reply to people individually. Let's move to wrap up if that's okay.
Then let's just wrap up. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. My last question to you was going to be, this is a hard journey. Let's, in just a minute or so, if there's anything that dementia has taught you in a positive light, what is it? Karen, let's start with you.
Wow. Dementia has taught me so much. But I think what it has taught me is that my fears are my fears, but I certainly can work around making things that I'm scared of or fearful of positive. And the way and the lessons that dementia has taught me in caring for my mother and for a community and through DementiaSA over the last 20 years is that we need kindness. We need to create a community where we really share, we open up, and we create an awareness that we can support each other in our in our difficult times and in the difficulties that face the person with dementia too. So, caregiving is very, very difficult, but DementiaSA is there.
Rayne, quickly, your final thoughts, please.
Yeah, for me, I always maintain that I have met very few people who suffer from dementia. I think people suffer from the way that they are treated. And as Karen said, kindness, oh my goodness. This is PhD in kindness to care for someone with dementia, because there, but for the grace of God, go you and I.
Absolutely. Fundisi, close us off, please.
And dementia is one disease that reminds us of our vulnerability and fragility as a human species.
Amen.
This is one disease that actually you cannot throw money at. You know how we throw money as a solution to problems? No matter how much money you have, when you are dealing with dementia, the doctors will tell you, I mean, the professor has told us they don't know everything, you know, and therefore it gets you to be humble. It humbles you. It levels the playing field. It makes you human. It makes you connected to your own vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds you that ultimately what matters most, it is qualities of care, of presence, of love, and patience. Because that is the only gift you can give to your family member. You can't give them millions. You can't give them medication. You can't give them anything except care, compassion, love, and full presence. And that is the essence of being human. So dementia is actually a gift.
A gift of presence, as Rayne said. Guys, this conversation doesn't end here tonight, so there will be links that will be sent to you. If you need help, you can go to Dementia South Africa and GERATEC, and I'm sure in there you will get more help. And also, as Dignity South Africa, we invite you to join us for our monthly dialogues, and please join our social media and also our website for more information on the topics that we'll be covering in the coming months. And if you haven't added your voice, we encourage you to sign our petition to decriminalize medical assisted dying in South Africa at away2.amandla.mob. On behalf of everyone who was joining us tonight, Karen, Fundisi, and Rayne, thank you so much for your wisdom, your honesty, and your generosity in sharing your experiences, your very emotional experiences with us. We really thank you. And I'd also like to thank everyone who's joined us tonight, and apologies for going over time. And thank you so much for adding meaning to this conversation. Please take care of yourselves and each other, and good night.